She was left alone in the snowstorm by the man who swore to protect her. When the black car stopped and the window rolled down, she never expected it to be him, and what he would say would change everything. The street was empty, covered in a thick layer of snow. The wind howled, carrying flakes that stuck to Camille's old coat. She shivered, her breath visible in the freezing air. Austin's car headlights vanished into the distance, and with them, any remaining warmth. He had left her here, alone, without a second thought. "Why did you have to be so jealous?" Camille muttered, her voice swallowed by the cold air. She hugged herself, trying to fight back the tears. The snow beneath her boots crunched as she took a step forward. She looked around. Nothing but white and dark. No signs of life. Her fingers started to hurt, the cold biting into her skin. She tried to move, but each step seemed heavier. Camille swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. The chill was settling in, and her thin boots weren't enough to protect her from the elements. She took a deep breath, trying to focus, but her mind drifted back to Austin's face, twisted with anger. His words echoed in her ears, blaming her, accusing her of flirting with his friends at dinner. She had tried to explain, but it was like talking to a wall. He was never going to listen. A gust of wind hit her, almost pushing her back. She stumbled, blinking against the snow. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to picture her mother. Her mother would have told her to be strong, to fight. But right now, Camille felt small and broken. "Come on," she whispered to herself. "Move." She forced herself forward, but her fingers were going numb and her vision was starting to blur. She tripped over her own feet, barely catching herself before falling into the snow. Camille's heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhaustion. Maybe Austin was right. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe she never was. The thought made her chest tighten even more, the tears finally slipping down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly. A car engine broke through the sound of the wind. Camille looked up, barely able to make out the outline of a vehicle approaching. It was a black car, the kind that screamed luxury. She hesitated, fear mixing with hope. The car slowed down, stopping right next to her. The window rolled down, and Camille's eyes widened in surprise. Jard, one of Austin's friends. His eyes were filled with concern as he leaned out the window. "Camille, what the hell are you doing out here?" Camille opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stared, her lips trembling. "Get in the car," Jard said, his voice urgent. "You're gonna freeze out here." She hesitated. Jard was Austin's friend. He was supposed to be on Austin's side. But the cold was too much, and she knew she wouldn't make it much longer if she stayed out here. Camille took a shaky breath, nodding. She reached for the door handle and got in, the warmth of the car hitting her like a wave. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the relief. "Are you okay?" Jard asked, his voice softer now. Camille shook her head. No, I'm not." Jard looked at her for a moment, then sighed. He reached over, turning the heat up. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Camille didn't argue. She just leaned back against the seat, her body slowly starting to thaw. She glanced at Jard, his eyes focused on the road. There was something different about him, a kind of gentleness she hadn't expected. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jard glanced at her. "I was on my way home. I saw you. Couldn't just leave you out here." Camille looked down at her hands, her fingers still red from the cold. She didn't know what to say. It was strange, being here with him. But she was grateful, more than she wanted to admit. They drove in silence for a while. The streets were quiet, the snow still falling. Camille tried not to think about Austin, about what he would do when he found out she was with Jard. But it was hard to push those thoughts away. After what felt like an eternity, Jard pulled up to a hotel. He turned to look at Camille, his eyes soft. You need a place to stay tonight. I'll cover it. Camille swallowed, her throat tight. I don't know if I should. Jad sighed. Look, Camille, you don't deserve to be out in the cold. Just take the room, okay? Get some rest. Camille nodded slowly. She was too tired to argue, too drained to fight. She just wanted to be warm, to forget about everything for a while. Jad got out of the car, opening her door for her. He helped her out, leading her inside. The warmth of the lobby wrapped around her, and Camille felt her shoulders relax just a little. The receptionist handed over a key, and Jad walked with Camille to the elevator. They stood there, the silence heavy between them. When they reached the door to her room, Jad paused. I'll be around if you need anything, he said, his voice gentle. Just take care of yourself, all right? Camille looked up at him, her eyes tired. She nodded. Thank you, Jared. He gave her a small smile, then turned and walked away. Camille watched him go, her heart heavy. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it behind her. She leaned against the door for a moment, closing her eyes. She was alone again, but at least she was safe. For now. Camille moved to the bed, sitting down. She pulled her boots off, her toes still aching from the cold. She wrapped the blanket around herself, trying to get comfortable. Her mind was racing, thoughts of Austin and Jad mixing together. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but at least she was warm. At least she had made it through the night. Camille lay back, staring at the ceiling. She took a deep breath, her eyes finally closing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to rest. Jad kept glancing at Camille as he drove. She was quiet, her gaze fixed on the dashboard, her eyes distant. The warmth of the car had brought some color back to her face, but her expression was still empty. Camille, what happened back there? He finally asked. Camille shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. It doesn't matter. Jad frowned. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she seemed to curl in on herself. He wanted to ask more, but something told him to give her space. They reached the hotel, and Jad pulled up to the entrance. He hesitated before speaking again. Let me get you a room. Just for tonight. You shouldn't be alone out here. He kept his tone gentle, trying not to sound like he was pushing her. Camille looked at him, her eyes narrowing. Why are you helping me, Jared? You're Austin's friend. Jad sighed. I am. But that doesn't mean I agree with what he did tonight. Leaving you out there like that, it's not right. Camille bit her lip, glancing at the hotel doors. The thought of a warm bed was tempting, but something inside her hesitated. Trust was a fragile thing, and right now, she didn't have any left to give. I don't know, she said, her voice shaky. I don't think I should. Jad nodded, understanding her hesitation. Look, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. I'm just offering you a place to sleep, no strings attached. You deserve to be somewhere safe. Camille swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She was tired, so tired of fighting, of being suspicious, of always being on edge. Maybe, just for tonight, she could let her guard down. Okay, she whispered. Jad got out of the car and opened her door, helping her out. Camille followed him into the hotel, her steps slow, almost as if she was unsure if this was real. The lobby was warm, the lights soft. It felt like another world compared to the freezing street she had been left on. The receptionist handed Jared a key, and they made their way to the elevator. The silence between them was thick, filled with things unsaid. Camille stared at her reflection in the elevator doors. She barely recognized the tired, worn face staring back. They reached the room, and Jad handed her the key. Here, get some rest. I'll be around if you need anything. Camille took the key, her fingers brushing against his. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking a little. Jard hesitated, then spoke softly. "Because you deserve better than this, Camille. And I'm sorry that Austin can't see that." Camille's chest tightened, and she looked away, not knowing how to respond. She nodded instead, turning to the door. She unlocked it and stepped inside, pausing for a moment before looking back at Jared. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. Jard gave her a small smile. "Take care, Camille." He turned and walked away, and Camille closed the door behind her. She leaned against it, taking a deep breath. She was alone, but this time, it didn't feel as terrifying as before. She was in control, even if it was just for tonight. She moved to the bed, sitting down heavily. She pulled her boots off, her feet aching from the cold. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself relax, even if it was just a little. The room was quiet, the only sound the hum of the heater. Camille looked around, taking in her surroundings. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, safe. She closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. She had made it through tonight, and that was enough for now. Camille lay back, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was still racing, flashes of Austin's angry face mixing with the concern she had seen in Jared's eyes. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but at least she was here. At least she had a chance to figure it out. She reached for the lamp, turning off the light. Darkness filled the room, but for once, it didn't feel overwhelming. Camille closed her eyes, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. She was tired, and sleep came quickly, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion. The morning came too soon. Camille woke up, the light from the window making her squint. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The snow, Austin, Jard. She sat up, her body stiff, her mind still foggy. There was a knock on the door. Camille's heart skipped a beat, her muscles tensing. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Camille?" Jared's voice came from the other side. "I brought some breakfast." Camille hesitated, then got up, opening the door just a crack. Jard stood there, holding a tray with coffee and some pastries. He smiled at her, his eyes kind. "Oh, thought you might need this," he said. Camille opened the door a little wider, letting him in. He set the tray down on the small table by the window. She watched him, still unsure, but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. Jard nodded, sitting down across from her. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her as she took a sip of coffee. The warmth spread through her, waking her up a little more. "You don't have to tell me anything," Jard said finally. "But I want you to know, you don't have to go back to him, Camille. There are other options." Camille looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening around it. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to believe him, to think that she could just walk away. But another part of her was scared, scared of what Austin would do, scared of what her life would look like without him. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Jard leaned forward, his eyes serious. "You can, and I'll help you if you want. You deserve to be happy, Camille." Camille looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she could trust herself. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her want to believe. "I need time," she said finally. Jard nodded. "I understand. Just know that you have a choice. And I'm here, whatever you decide." Camille took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a say in it. Camille woke up slowly, her body still heavy with exhaustion. She blinked at the unfamiliar room, taking in the soft white sheets, the heavy curtains, the faint hum of the heater. For a second, she didn't know where she was. Then it hit her. Jard. The hotel. The snowstorm. She sat up, her heart pounding. She looked around, trying to ground herself. Everything felt surreal. Last night was a blur, being left by Austin, Jard showing up, offering her a place to stay. Camille rubbed her hands together, feeling the warmth, reminding herself she was safe. She wasn't out there in the cold anymore. There was a knock on the door. Camille flinched, her muscles tensing. "Camille?" Jared's voice was muffled through the door. "I brought coffee and some breakfast." Camille hesitated, then slowly got up and walked to the door. She opened it a crack, peeking out. Jared stood there, a tray in his hands, giving her a small smile. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Camille hesitated again, then opened the door wider, stepping back. Jard walked in, setting the tray on the small table by the window. He looked at her, his eyes soft. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Camille shrugged, her shoulders tense. "I don't know. Tired, I guess." Jard nodded, understanding. He motioned to the chair. "Sit down. Eat something. You need your strength." Camille sat down, wrapping her hands around the hot coffee cup. The warmth seeped into her fingers, and she took a slow sip, the bitter taste grounding her a little more. They sat in silence for a moment, Camille eating quietly while Jard watched her. Finally, he spoke. "I don't want to push you," he said, "but I want to help you, Camille. You don't deserve what happened last night. You shouldn't have to go through that." Camille looked down, her chest tightening. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe him, to think that she could just walk away from Austin and start over. But another part of her was scared. Scared of what Austin would do, scared of what life would be like without him. Jard seemed to sense her hesitation. "I know it's not easy," he said, "but you have options. You don't have to go back to him." Camille shook her head. "It's not that simple. He wouldn't just let me go. And I don't even know if I can do this on my own." Jard leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You're stronger than you think, Camille. You've put up with so much. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be safe." Camille's throat tightened, and she looked away. She didn't know if she believed that. She had spent so long trying to make things work with Austin, trying to be enough for him. Maybe she just wasn't meant to be happy. Jard reached out, placing his hand over hers. "You're not alone," he said softly. "I'm here. Whatever you need, I'll help you." Camille looked at him, her eyes searching his face. There was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made her want to believe him. But trust was hard, especially after everything she had been through. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Jared nodded, his expression softening. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, okay?" Camille swallowed hard, nodding. She didn't know what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, she had a choice. And that thought, as small as it was, gave her a sliver of hope. Later that morning, Jard left Camille alone in the room, giving her some space. Camille sat by the window, staring out at the street below. People were going about their lives, bundled up against the cold, moving from one place to another. She wondered if they were happy, if they felt safe. She wondered what it would be like to live a life without fear. Her phone buzzed, and Camille flinched, her heart skipping a beat. She picked it up, her stomach dropping when she saw Austin's name on the screen. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen before she finally set it down, ignoring the call. She couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not when everything was still so raw. Camille took a deep breath, her hands shaking. She needed to figure out what to do next. She couldn't stay in the hotel forever, and she couldn't go back to Austin. She needed a plan. But where would she go? What would she do? She had no job, no money, no real support system. She had been so isolated, so cut off from everything outside of Austin. The thought of starting over was terrifying. She looked at her reflection in the window, her face pale, her eyes tired. She barely recognized herself. She had lost so much of who she was, trying to fit into Austin's world, trying to be what he wanted. She had forgotten what it felt like to be herself. Camille closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She needed to find herself again. She needed to figure out who she was, what she wanted, and maybe, just maybe, that meant leaving everything behind, even if it was scary. Jard returned in the afternoon, knocking softly on the door before stepping inside. Camille looked up, giving him a small smile. "Hey," Jard said, his voice gentle. "How are you holding up?" Camille shrugged. "I don't know. I've been thinking a lot." Jard nodded, sitting down across from her. "About what?" "About what to do next," Camille said. "I can't stay here forever. I need to figure things out." Jard looked at her, his eyes serious. "You don't have to do it alone, Camille. I meant what I said. I'll help you, whatever you decide." Camille bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. She looked down, her hands trembling. "Why are you doing this, Jared? Why do you care?" Jard hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because I care about you, Camille. And because I've seen what Austin's done to you. I've seen how he treats you. And it's not right. You deserve better than that." Camille's heart pounded, her chest tightening. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so long thinking that this was just the way things were, that she didn't deserve more. Hearing Jared say otherwise made something inside her crack, like a wall she had built around herself was starting to crumble. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jard reached out, taking her hand. "You can, and I'll be here, every step of the way. You're not alone, Camille." Camille looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. But there was something else there too, something that felt a lot like hope. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could start over, find herself again. Maybe she could be happy, and maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. The day passed slowly, the minutes dragging as Camille tried to come to terms with everything. She had spent most of her time sitting by the window, watching the snow outside, trying to piece together some semblance of a plan. The room was quiet, and for once, it felt like a safe place to think. But that fragile calm shattered in the late afternoon. Camille heard loud footsteps approaching in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat as the door handle jiggled, and then a loud knock echoed through the room. "Camille, open this door." Austin's voice was muffled but unmistakable. It was rough, filled with anger. Camille's stomach twisted, her pulse quickening. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. How had he found her? Camille stood there for a moment, her body trembling, unsure of what to do. "Camille, I know you're in there," Austin yelled, pounding on the door again. "Open the damn door!" Camille backed away, her hands shaking. She looked at the door, her eyes wide. She couldn't let him in. Not now, not after everything. Another knock, this one harder, more forceful. "Camille, I'm not playing around." His voice carried a dangerous edge, one she knew too well. Camille's eyes darted around the room, her mind racing. She needed help. She needed someone to stop him. Before she could think, her phone buzzed, and she grabbed it, seeing Jared's name. She quickly answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jard." "It's Austin. He's here," she said, her voice shaking. "Camille, listen to me," Jared said, his voice calm but urgent. "Lock the door. Don't open it. I'm on my way." Camille nodded. even though Jared couldn't see her. She backed away from the door, locking it and then moving toward the corner of the room. She hugged her knees, her heart pounding. Outside, Austin kept yelling, his voice filled with rage. Camille closed her eyes, trying to block it out, trying to focus on her breathing. But the fear was overwhelming, wrapping around her chest like a vice. "Come on, Camille. You think you can just run away?" Austin's voice was closer, right outside the door. "You think you can leave me after everything I've done for you?" Camille's hands were shaking, her eyes filling with tears. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had to stay strong. She had to wait for Jared. Minutes felt like hours. Camille could hear Austin pacing outside, his voice growing more erratic. She heard him curse, followed by the sound of something hitting the wall. Then suddenly there was another voice, a deeper one. "Jared. Austin, back off!" Jared's voice was firm, commanding. There was a pause. Then Austin's angry reply. "What the hell are you doing here, Jared? This is between me and my wife." "I'm not going to let you hurt her anymore," Jared said, his voice steady. "You need to leave. Now." Camille held her breath, listening. She could hear the tension, the anger. The hallway was silent for a moment, and then Austin's voice came again, filled with disdain. "She's mine, Jared. You think you can just take her away from me?" "I'm not taking her," Jared replied. "She deserves to make her own choices. You need to respect that." Camille's heart pounded, her eyes wide. She heard shuffling, and then a loud thud. Her stomach dropped. Something was happening. She stood up, moving closer to the door, her hands trembling. "Stay down, Austin," Jared said, his voice harsher now. There was a groan, and then silence. Camille bit her lip, her heart racing. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to open the door, but fear held her back. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the door. "Camille!" "It's me." "It's safe now," Jared said, his voice gentle. Camille hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door, opening it just a crack. Jared stood there, his face flushed, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his gaze searching her face. Camille nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah, I think so." Jared glanced behind him. Austin was on the floor, groaning, his face twisted in pain. Jared looked back at Camille, his expression softening. "Come on. We need to get you out of here," he said. Camille swallowed, nodding. She grabbed her bag, her hands still shaking, and followed Jared out of the room. She kept her eyes down, avoiding Austin's glare as they walked past him. They made their way down the hallway, Jared's hand on her back, guiding her. Camille could feel her heart pounding, her mind racing. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not after this. When they reached the car, Jared opened the door for her, and Camille climbed in, her hands still trembling. Jared got in the driver's seat, starting the engine. He glanced at her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. Camille took a deep breath, nodding. I think so. Just get me away from here." Jared nodded, putting the car in gear. They pulled away from the hotel, the tension still thick in the air. Camille stared out the window, her heart still racing. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing: she couldn't go back. Not after this. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights blurring past them. Jared kept glancing at her, his expression filled with worry. Finally, he spoke. "Camille, I think you need to get somewhere safe, somewhere Austin can't find you." Camille looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Where would I go?" Jared hesitated, then spoke softly. "I have a place, out of the city. You could stay there, just until you figure things out." Camille bit her lip, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could trust him. But she also knew she couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. She needed to find a way to take control of her life again. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "But just for a little while." Jad nodded, giving her a small smile. "Of course. Whatever you need." They continued driving, the city slowly fading away behind them. Camille leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to escape, to start over. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she would ever feel truly safe again, but she was willing to try. She was willing to fight for herself. And with Jad by her side, maybe she wouldn't have to do it alone. Camille rented a small room in a boarding house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a bed, a dresser, and a tiny window, but it was hers. She sat on the narrow bed, staring at the bare walls, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had left Jared behind at the hotel, deciding she needed space from both him and Austin. She needed to be alone to figure things out. The room was cold, but Camille didn't mind. She liked the silence, the emptiness. It gave her time to think, time to process. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, her mind drifting back to the confrontation at the hotel. Austin's face, twisted with anger, and Jad stepping in to protect her. She didn't know what to think anymore. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Camille picked it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Jared's name. She hesitated, staring at the message. "Camille, can we talk? I just want to make sure you're okay." Camille bit her lip, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wanted to reply, to tell him she was fine, but something held her back. She set the phone down, letting out a shaky breath. She needed space, needed time. She couldn't deal with this right now. The next few days passed in a blur. Camille kept to herself, avoiding any contact with Austin or Jad. She spent her days walking around town, trying to clear her head, trying to figure out what to do next. But no matter how much she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to them. Austin, with his promises of change, and Jad, with his quiet concern. One afternoon, Camille was walking back to her room when she saw a familiar figure standing by the door. Her heart sank. Austin. He looked up as she approached, a smile spreading across his face. "Camille," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I've been looking for you." Camille stopped a few feet away, her body tensing. "What are you doing here, Austin?" "I just want to talk," he said, taking a step toward her. "I miss you. I want to make things right." Camille shook her head, her chest tightening. "Austin, you need to leave." "I don't want to talk to you." Austin's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. "Camille, please. I know I messed up, but I love you. I can change. Just give me another chance." Camille swallowed, her hands trembling. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that things could be different. But deep down, she knew they couldn't. She couldn't go back to the way things were. "No, Austin," she said, her voice steady. I can't do this anymore." Austin's face hardened, his jaw clenching. He took another step toward her, his voice low. "You think you can just walk away from me? After everything we've been through?" Camille took a step back, her heart pounding. "I'm not doing this, Austin. Please, just leave." Austin stared at her for a long moment, his eyes cold. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Camille watched him go, her chest tight, tears stinging her eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had done it. She had stood up to him, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. That evening, Camille sat in her room, her mind racing. She thought about Austin, about the way he had looked at her, the way his voice had changed when she refused him. She knew she had made the right decision, but it still hurt. She had spent so much of her life with him, trying to make things work, trying to be enough. And now she was letting it go. Her phone buzzed again, and Camille picked it up, her heart sinking when she saw Jared's name. "I'm worried about you, Camille. Please, just let me know you're okay." Camille sighed, her fingers trembling as she typed a reply. "I'm fine, Jad. I just need some time. Please understand." She hit send, her chest tightening. She didn't want to push him away, but she needed to figure this out on her own. She needed to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet without relying on anyone else. The next morning, there was another knock on her door. Camille's heart sank. She opened the door just a crack, her stomach dropping when she saw Austin standing there again. "Camille, please," he said, his voice soft, his eyes filled with something that almost looked like regret. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I love you, and I can't just let you go." Camille shook her head, her heart pounding. "Austin, you need to leave. You can't keep showing up like this." Austin stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "Just hear me out. I promise things will be different. I'll change. I'll be better." Camille hesitated, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But she knew better. She knew that the cycle would only continue, that nothing would really change. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore, Austin. You need to leave." Austin stared at her, his expression hardening. For a moment, Camille thought he might push his way in, but then he stepped back, his jaw clenching. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "If that's what you want." He turned and walked away, and Camille closed the door, her hands shaking. She leaned against it, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had stood up to him again. But the fear, the uncertainty, it was still there, gnawing at her. Later that day, Camille sat on the bed, her phone in her hand. She thought about everything. Austin, Jad, the choices she had made. She needed to move forward, needed to find a way to truly break free. But it was hard. It was so hard to let go of the life she had known, even if it had been filled with pain. Her phone buzzed, and Camille looked down, surprised to see a message from Jared. "Camille, I'm here if you need anything. I care about you, and I just want you to be safe." Camille took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to reach out, to let him in. But another part of her was scared of depending on someone again, scared of getting hurt. She typed a reply, her fingers trembling. "Thank you, Jad. I appreciate it. But I need to do this on my own." She hit send, her heart pounding. She didn't know if she was making the right choice, but it was the only one she could make right now. She needed to find her own strength, needed to learn how to stand on her own. Camille took a deep breath, her eyes closing. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it. Alone. Camille had decided she needed to end things once and for all. The confrontation with Austin at her door had been the final straw. She couldn't keep living in fear, couldn't keep running from the past. She needed to take control of her life. And that meant confronting both Austin and Jared, putting an end to the chaos that had taken over her life. She texted them both, telling them to meet her at a small coffee shop in the middle of town. She chose the location deliberately, public, neutral ground. She wasn't going to be backed into a corner. She was going to make herself heard. The coffee shop was quiet when Camille arrived. She chose a table in the corner, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel her heart pounding, her stomach twisted in knots. She didn't know how this was going to go, but she knew she had to do it. She had to face them, to make her stance clear. Jad was the first to arrive. He walked in, his eyes immediately finding hers. He gave her a small, hesitant smile as he approached. "Camille," he said, his voice soft. "Are you okay?" Camille nodded, her face serious. "We need to talk, Jared. I need to get some things off my chest." Jared nodded, taking a seat across from her. He looked concerned, his eyes searching her face. "Whatever you need, Camille, I'm here." Camille took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly. Before she could say anything, the door to the coffee shop opened again. Austin walked in, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. His face was hard, his jaw clenched as he made his way over. "Camille," he said, his voice low. He shot a glare at Jared before sitting down beside her. "Why did you want us both here?" Camille looked at them, her heart pounding. She could feel the tension between them, the unspoken anger, but she pushed it aside. This was her moment. She needed to say what she had to say. "I asked you both here because I need to make something very clear," Camille began, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being pulled between the two of you. I need space. I need to be on my own." Austin's face twisted in anger, and he leaned forward. "Camille, what are you talking about? We're supposed to be together." "You can't just walk away from everything we have." Camille shook her head, her chest tightening. "Austin, what we have isn't healthy. It's not love, it's control, and I can't keep living like that." Austin opened his mouth to argue, but Jared cut in, his voice firm. "She's right, Austin. You need to let her go. She deserves to be happy, and you're not giving her that." Austin's eyes narrowed, and he turned to Jared, his voice filled with venom. "And you think you're going to give her that? You think you can just step in and take her away from me?" Camille's hands clenched into fists, her voice rising. "This isn't about either of you. This is about me. I'm tired of being treated like something to be fought over. I'm not yours, Austin. And I'm not yours, Jared. I belong to myself." Both men fell silent, their eyes on her. Camille took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the tension in the air, but she pushed through. "I need to figure out who I am without either of you," she said, her voice softer now. "I need time to heal. And that means I need space from both of you." Jared looked down, his face filled with regret. "I understand, Camille. I just want you to be happy. Whatever you need, I'll respect that." Austin, on the other hand, looked furious. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake, Camille. You think you can just walk away from this? From everything we've been through?" Camille met his eyes, her voice steady. "Yes, Austin, I can, and I will." Austin stared at her, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and something else, something that almost looked like desperation. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "If that's what you want." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the door slamming behind him. Camille watched him go, her chest tight, tears stinging her eyes. She took a deep breath, turning back to Jared. Jared looked at her, his eyes soft. "I'm sorry, Camille. I never wanted to make things harder for you." Camille shook her head, her voice breaking. "It's not your fault, Jared. I need to do this on my own." Jared nodded, his face filled with understanding. "I get it. Just know that I'm here if you ever need anything. I care about you, Camille. More than you know." Camille's throat tightened, and she looked away, her eyes filling with tears. "I know, and I appreciate it, but I need to find my own way." Jared reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "I hope you find what you're looking for. You deserve to be happy." Camille nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "But thank you, Jared." They sat there for a moment, the silence heavy between them. Then Jared stood up, giving her one last, lingering look before walking away. Camille watched him go, her heart aching. She knew this was the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She had done it. She had confronted them both, had made her stance clear. She was choosing herself, choosing to take control of her own life. It was terrifying, but also freeing. Camille sat there for a long time, staring at her reflection in the window. She could see the snow falling outside, the world moving on without her. She felt a sense of calm settle over her, a quiet determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was done letting others decide her life for her. She was ready to start over, to find out who she was without anyone else telling her what she should be. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Camille stood outside the small apartment building, her breath visible in the cold air. The key to her new place felt heavy in her hand, and she stared at the door, taking a deep breath. This was it, a new start, a place that was hers alone, no Austin, no Jard. Just her. She pushed the key into the lock, turning it until the door clicked open. The apartment was tiny, just one room with a bed, a small kitchen area and a table, but it was enough. Camille stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She set her bag down and looked around, letting the silence settle in. She ran her fingers over the kitchen counter, taking in the chipped tiles, the worn stove. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Camille smiled a little, feeling a sense of pride. She had done this, had found a place for herself, had made a decision on her own terms. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Camille spent her time unpacking the few belongings she had, arranging them around the apartment. She bought a couple of second-hand chairs, a few dishes, and some blankets to make the place feel more like home. It was simple, but it was a start. In the mornings, Camille would walk to a small cafe down the street for coffee. The owners, an older couple named Marta and Leo, were kind, always greeting her with a warm smile. Camille liked the routine, liked seeing their familiar faces. It made her feel a little less alone. One morning, as Camille sat at her usual table by the window, Marta approached her, setting down a cup of coffee. "On the house today, dear," Marta said, giving Camille a kind smile. "You look like you could use a little extra warmth." Camille smiled back, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Marta. That's really kind of you." Marta sat down across from her, her eyes studying Camille's face. "You know, I've seen a lot of people come and go through this neighborhood. You remind me of someone I knew once." "She was strong, like you." Camille looked down, her chest tightening. "I don't feel very strong." Marta reached across the table, patting Camille's hand. "Strength isn't about never being scared, dear. It's about keeping going, even when you are." Camille swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Marta smiled, standing up. "You'll be just fine, dear." "I can tell." Camille watched her walk away, her heart feeling a little lighter. Maybe Marta was right. Maybe she could do this. Camille spent her days exploring the neighborhood, getting to know the small shops and the people who worked there. She found a part-time job at a local bookstore, helping stock shelves and run the register. The owner, an older man named Frank, was quiet but kind, and Camille liked the calm atmosphere of the shop. It felt good to have a routine, to have a place to go every day. The bookstore was small, filled with the smell of old paper and dust, and Camille found comfort in the quiet. She liked the way the sunlight streamed through the windows, the way people would come in and browse, lost in their own worlds. One afternoon, as she was arranging a display, Frank came up beside her, his hands in his pockets. "You're doing a good job, Camille," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Glad to have you here." Camille looked at him, her heart warming. "Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it." He nodded, giving her a small smile before walking away. Camille watched him go, a sense of belonging settling in her chest. She was starting to build something here, something small, but it was hers. One evening, Camille sat in her apartment, a paintbrush in her hand. She had picked up some paints and a canvas from a second-hand shop, deciding she needed something to keep her hands busy, something to help her process everything. She hadn't painted in years, not since before she had met Austin. The colors flowed across the canvas, bright and vibrant. Camille lost herself in the movement of the brush, in the way the paint mixed and swirled. It felt good, like a release, like she was finally letting go of everything that had been holding her back. She painted late into the night, the small apartment filled with the soft sound of the brush against the canvas. When she finally stepped back, her hands were covered in paint, her body tired but her heart light. The painting was abstract, a mix of colors and shapes, but it felt like her, a reflection of everything she had been through, everything she was still becoming. Camille smiled, setting the brush down. She looked at the painting, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. She was doing it. She was finding herself again, one step at a time. The days turned into weeks, and Camille slowly started to feel more at home. She had her routines, her job at the bookstore, her mornings at the cafe. She was building a life for herself, one that was simple but filled with small moments of peace. One afternoon, as she was leaving the bookstore, Camille saw a familiar face standing across the street. Her heart skipped a beat. Austin. He hadn't seen her yet, and Camille quickly turned, ducking into a nearby shop. She watched him from the window, her chest tightening. He was looking around, his expression hard, his eyes scanning the street. Camille's hands shook as she watched him, fear bubbling up inside her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't let him find her, not now, not after everything she had worked for. After a few minutes, Austin turned and walked away, and Camille let out a shaky breath. She stayed in the shop until she was sure he was gone, her heart still pounding. She knew she couldn't let her guard down. Austin wasn't going to give up easily, but she also knew she couldn't live in fear. She had come too far, had fought too hard to let him take this from her. She was stronger now, stronger than she had ever been, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. That night, Camille sat on her bed, her heart still heavy from the encounter with Austin. She took a deep breath, picking up her phone. She opened her messages, scrolling through until she found Jared's name. She hesitated for a moment, then typed a quick message. "Hey, Jad, I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I'm doing okay. I hope you are too." She hit send, her chest tightening. She didn't know if he would reply, didn't know if she was ready for that. But she wanted him to know that she was okay, that she was finding her way. Camille set the phone down, looking at the painting she had done, the colors bright against the white of the wall. She smiled, a sense of calm washing over her. She was still scared. She still had moments where she doubted herself, where the fear threatened to overwhelm her. But she was learning to fight through it, to find her own strength. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. Camille's life had settled into a rhythm that she found comforting. She woke up early, got dressed, and walked down to the small cafe where Marta would always greet her with a warm smile and a steaming cup of coffee. Then she would head to the bookstore, where she spent her time sorting through shelves, helping customers, and enjoying the calm quiet of the shop. It was a life that was beginning to feel like her own. But just when Camille thought things were finally stabilizing, the past found a way to creep back in. One afternoon, as she was taking inventory in the bookstore, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and frowned. A message from Austin. "Camille, I want to talk. I miss you." Her heart sank. She read the message twice, her mind spinning. She had managed to avoid Austin since that day at the coffee shop. She had hoped he would eventually let it go, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Camille took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she put the phone back in her pocket. She couldn't deal with this now, not here, not in this safe place she had found for herself. Later that evening, as Camille sat in her small apartment, the weight of Austin's message lingered. She tried to push it away, tried to focus on the painting she had started, but her mind kept drifting back to him. The way he had looked at her, the way his voice had turned cold when she refused him. The fear was still there, gnawing at her, reminding her that she wasn't entirely free. Camille took a deep breath, setting the paintbrush down. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Jared's name. She hesitated, then typed out a message. "Austin is still trying to contact me. I don't know what to do." She hit send, her heart pounding. She didn't know if Jared would respond, didn't know if she even wanted him to, but she needed to tell someone, needed to get it off her chest. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. A reply from Jared. "I'm so sorry, Camille. Do you want me to come by? I can help if you need." Camille stared at the message, her chest tightening. She appreciated his concern, but she knew she couldn't rely on him. She needed to figure this out on her own. "No, it's okay. I just needed to tell someone. I'll handle it." Jared's reply was quick. "Okay, but if you need anything, I'm always here for you." Camille set the phone down, a small smile tugging at her lips. It felt good to know that someone cared, that someone was on her side. But she also knew that she needed to face this herself. She needed to confront Austin one last time and make it clear that there was no going back. The next day, Camille walked down to the cafe, her mind made up. She needed to be firm, needed to make sure Austin understood that she was serious. She ordered her coffee and sat by the window, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. She watched people pass by, her heart heavy with the decision she had made. After finishing her coffee, Camille pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Austin. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park at 3. She hit send, her heart pounding. She knew this was risky, knew that Austin could be unpredictable, but she needed to do this. She needed to put an end to it once and for all. Camille stood by the fountain in the park, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. The sky was overcast, the air cold. She could see her breath in front of her, could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Austin arrived a few minutes later, his face set in a hard expression. He walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached her, he stopped, his hands in his pockets. "Camille," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "Thanks for meeting me." Camille nodded, her eyes narrowing. What do you want, Austin?" Austin took a deep breath, stepping closer. "I just want to talk. I miss you. I know I messed up, but I love you, Camille. I want to make things right." Camille shook her head, her chest tightening. "Austin, you don't love me. You love controlling me. And I can't live like that anymore." Austin's face twisted, his eyes narrowing. "That's not true. I love you. I want to be with you. Why can't you see that?" Camille took a step back, her voice steady. "Because love isn't about control. It's about respect. And you never respected me, Austin. You made me feel small, like I wasn't enough. And I'm done feeling that way." Austin's jaw clenched, and he took a step closer, his voice low. "You think you're better off without me? You think you can just walk away from everything we had?" Camille looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "Yes, I do. I deserve better, and I'm not afraid to be on my own anymore." For a moment, Austin just stared at her, his eyes filled with anger and something else, something that looked like pain. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're making a mistake, Camille." Camille took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "No, Austin. The mistake would be going back to you." Austin's face hardened, and he turned away, his hands clenched into fists. He walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing through the empty park. Camille watched him go, her chest tight, tears stinging her eyes. She took a deep breath, her body trembling. She had done it. She had stood up to him, had made her decision clear, and as scary as it was, it also felt freeing. She was no longer bound by fear, no longer held back by the past. She was finally free to move forward. That evening, Camille sat in her apartment, her heart still heavy from the confrontation. She picked up her phone and opened her messages, scrolling through until she found Jared's name. She hesitated for a moment, then typed out a message. "I did it. I confronted Austin. It's over." She hit send, her chest tightening. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. "I'm so proud of you, Camille. You're stronger than you know." Camille smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She set the phone down, looking around her small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a place where she could be herself, where she could finally find peace. She picked up her paintbrush, dipping it into the bright blue paint. She moved it across the canvas, her strokes sure and steady. She was creating something new, something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was creating her own life. Camille took a deep breath, her heart light. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was ready for it. She was ready to face whatever came her way, ready to live her life on her own terms. She was free, and that was enough. Camille woke up to the sound of gentle snowfall outside her window. She rubbed her eyes and slowly sat up, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift slightly from her shoulders. It was a new day, and there was a lightness to it that she hadn't felt in a long time. She got out of bed, wrapped herself in a warm sweater, and made her way to the window. The world outside was covered in a soft blanket of snow, everything quiet and still. Camille smiled to herself, her heart feeling calm for the first time in what felt like years. She was starting over, and for once, she was okay with the uncertainty that came with it. She spent her morning tidying up the small apartment, humming softly to herself. She put on a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and opened the window slightly to let in the crisp winter breeze. Today, she had no plans other than to enjoy the peace she had fought so hard for. Camille sat at her small table, sipping her coffee and glancing at the painting she had worked on the night before. It was almost finished, a burst of colors that seemed to reflect the journey she had been on. She wasn't sure what it was supposed to represent, but she liked it. It felt real, honest, like a piece of her heart put onto the canvas. Her phone buzzed on the table, and Camille reached for it. A message from Jared. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing well." Camille smiled, her heart warming. She typed a quick reply. "I'm doing well, thank you. I hope you're okay too." Jared responded almost immediately. "I'm glad to hear that. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Camille put the phone down, her smile lingering. She appreciated Jared's support, but she also knew that she needed this time for herself. She needed to learn who she was, without the influence of anyone else. Later that afternoon, Camille decided to go for a walk. She wrapped herself in her coat and scarf, slipping on her boots before stepping out into the cold. The air was crisp, her breath visible as she walked down the quiet street. She liked the solitude, the way the world seemed to slow down under the weight of the snow. She walked to the park, her steps crunching softly on the snowy path. It was the same park where she had confronted Austin, but today, it felt different. Today, it felt like her park, a place where she could come to think, to breathe. Camille found a bench and sat down, watching the snow fall around her. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She felt the cold on her face, the wind brushing against her skin. and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She opened her eyes and looked around, taking in the scene. Children were playing in the snow, their laughter echoing through the park. Couples walked hand in hand, their faces bright with smiles. Camille watched them, her heart swelling with a sense of hope. She wasn't alone. She was part of this world, part of something bigger. Camille pulled out her phone, snapping a picture of the park. She sent it to Jared, along with a short message. "Thank you for believing in me. I'm doing okay, really." Jared's reply came quickly. "I'm proud of you, Camille. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Camille smiled, her eyes misting over. She put her phone away, her heart feeling lighter. She was ready to move forward, ready to leave the pain of the past behind her. That evening, Camille returned to her apartment, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She made herself a simple dinner, the small kitchen filling with the comforting aroma of warm food. She ate quietly, her thoughts drifting to everything she had been through. She thought about Austin, about the way he had tried to control her, to keep her from finding her own happiness. She thought about the fear she had lived with, the way she had felt trapped, like there was no way out. And she thought about Jared, about his kindness, his willingness to help her even when she pushed him away. Camille took a deep breath, setting her fork down. She was proud of herself. She had faced her fears, had stood up for herself, had found a way to move forward. She wasn't the same person she had been when Austin left her in that snowstorm. She was stronger now, more sure of herself, and she knew that, no matter what happened, she could handle it. She picked up her paintbrush, dipping it into the bright yellow paint. She moved the brush across the canvas, adding a splash of color to the piece she'd been working on. It was a burst of light, a symbol of the hope she had found within herself. Camille smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. She was creating something beautiful, something that was hers alone, and that was enough. The next morning, Camille woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. She reached for it, blinking at the screen. A message from an unknown number. "Camille, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted to say that I'm truly sorry. I hope you're okay. Austin." Camille stared at the message, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the screen. She didn't know if she was ready to respond, didn't know if she even wanted to. After a moment, she put the phone down, deciding to leave it for now. She didn't need to respond to Austin. She didn't owe him anything. She had moved on, and she wasn't going to let his words pull her back into the past. Camille got up, stretching her arms over her head. She had a new day ahead of her, a new chance to keep moving forward. She wasn't going to let anything hold her back, not fear, not regret, not the ghosts of her past. She dressed warmly, her eyes catching her reflection in the mirror. She looked different, stronger, more confident. Camille smiled at herself, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. She had come so far, had fought so hard to find herself again, and she wasn't going to stop now. She left her apartment, the cold air hitting her face as she stepped outside. She walked down the street, her steps sure and steady. She had a life to build, a future to create, and for the first time, she felt like she was ready for it. Camille made her way to the cafe, Marta greeting her with a warm smile as she stepped inside. She ordered her coffee, sitting down at her usual table by the window. She looked out at the snow, the world moving around her, and she smiled. She was here. She was alive, and she was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, Camille felt truly free.